Well, good evening, everybody. This is Nick, Pennsylvania, here as I always am with my good friend Brendan Bond. Good evening, Brendan.
Good evening, Nick.
So, it is getting deep in spring right now. We've had a couple pretty warm days. It's kind of a chillier day after we got used to some high 70s for a little while, and we got a dreary, rainy day. So it's a perfect day for us to kind of be chatting.
Right.
And with the rain, with the time of year and everything, it brings my mind to bodies of water and fishing. And you have brought forward some freshwater monster stories, is the best way to put it, I guess.
Yes.
So I'm just going to hand things over to you.
Cool.
Get right into it.
As a fisherman, I love the idea of freshwater monsters. And you have this fun crossover, I think, between cryptozoology and folklore and some natural history stuff with some pretty wild creatures that did exist in our waterways. I thought I had heard of a lot of them in our area, or at least most of them. So whenever I hear something that is that I've never heard of before, it piques my interest, obviously. And one that I heard of recently and had to do some more reading into is the Cheat River monster. And had you ever heard of this before, Nick?
You had asked me the other day, and again, as ever, when you ask me these things and I'm not really familiar with, I resist any urge to look them up so that I can learn about them as we talk. However, I feel like this is one that I had read about a long time ago, but I didn't really remember anything of it. So it was a story that, again, I feel quite certain, but no memory of it. So
yeah,
essentially no, I have not.
Possible I had heard of before. I had heard of a few monsters in the area, but never the Cheat River monster. And so looking into this, you find a few different stories, and some of them do kind of blend into some of the other tales from the area. But again, this is from the Cheat River, which is down in southwestern Pennsylvania in, Fayette County, and goes down into West Virginia, down near Uniontown, if anyone's familiar with that area. And I found a article that was quoted a lot of places from the Uniontown Standard in July 15th of 1893. So we're getting back.
I was going to say, that's going back a good ways before I anticipated you would say.
Yeah, because I think when I think of a lot of monster stuff in this area, it's like early 1900s stuff.
Yeah, I would say so much the cryptid stuff I associate with a lot of the New Age stuff and post World War II.
Right. So this one's a little older, which I thought was cool. So we have this, again, really fun article. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive into this article and read it verbatim. And again, this is from the Uniontown Standard, July 15th, 1893. Story of a hideous animal in Fayette County. A combination of hideousnesses is a carrier off of smaller stock of the farmers plunges into a deep pool in the river. So, July 15th. The strange story of an amphibious monster that lives in Seltzer's Hole in the Cheat River and roams about the country in the southern part of this county, devouring animals of the farmers, is told by the Standard this evening in a correspondence from Morse Cross Roads.
That's a mouthful, and why do they got to call it out on what it looks like? They're pretty harsh with all this.
Right, right? It was a style of the time, I guess. For months past, farmers near the Line Ferry have been missing sheep, lambs, pigs, and even young calves, to say nothing of innumerable chickens, turkeys, geese, and until a few days ago, they blamed local workers and other laborers engaged in grading the state line road with stealing the missing animals. So they were thinking that local workers were coming through and just stealing stuff.
Makes sense enough.
Right. Not a night since early last spring has passed without some farmer waking up in the morning to find that it had been robbed of a fat pig, a young calf, a sheep, 2 or 3 choice lambs, or half a dozen of his finest barnyard fowls. Effort was made to catch the thief, but every attempt proved a failure, and everybody had about settled down to the belief that the laborers along the railroad were doing the stealing. But the mystery has last been cleared up to the minds of at least 3 of the most reputable farmers in the neighborhood. They will not at present allow their names to be made public, and it was only after assuring the correspondent to keep their names out of print that they told him what they knew about this monster of Seltzer's Hole, as it is called. They each saw the monster on different occasions, but at about the same hour in the morning, and each gave about the same description of it. At first I saw the monster, said one of the farmers, just at daybreak last Tuesday morning. I got up very early to go to Uniontown and started out to the pasture field to get the horses, and just as I opened the barnyard gate, I heard a terrible racket down by the calf pen, which was immediately followed by the stampede of every living object in the barnyard in the direction of the house. The chickens and the turkeys flew with loud cries of distress into the trees and the yard and to the roofs of the houses, and the cattle and pigs crowded around me, trembling with fright and utterly pitiful outcries of terror. Something down by the calf pen had given them a terrible fright, but what it was I could not imagine. But I resolved to find out, and pushing my way through the trembling animals, I started down to the calf pen. When I got within 20 yards of the pen, the most horrible-looking monster the mind could conceive clambered over the strong rail fence that surrounded the calf pen, carrying in its mouth a 3-day-old calf. I tried to turn and fly to the house for protection, but if the monster had been within a foot of me, I could not have moved an inch. I tried to cry out, but not a sound escaped my lips. My tongue seemed to have been made of lead, and my eyes were fixed on the awful-looking creature that was slowly moving off towards the river, still carrying in its mouth the calf that it had stolen. It looked to me to be the size of an Alderney cow. An Alderney cow, although
Not
it's
familiar with what that is.
yeah, I'm sure to our bovine experts out there.
Well, I'll tell you what. Can you spell that for me?
Alderny.
Okay.
I assume it's like a breed of cows, or
Right. You would be correct. It, honest to goodness, it kind of looks. You ever see those cows, that really wide cow? It just looks like a brown and white cow.
Those like I always thought they were called beef cows.
I would just call it a cow.
Just a cow.
Yeah, it looks like a cow.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if I were a farmer, I'd be a little more
specific, but right. It looked to me to be the size of an Alderney cow, although its legs were much shorter and its body somewhat longer. Its back was ridged and humped in the center, and from behind each shoulder protruded something that was neither a wing, fin, arm, nor claw, though it resembled each of them. Its tail was long and thick and resembled that of a crocodile, except that the end was forked, resembling that of a monstrous fish. Its feet were webbed and resembled those of a bear in outline, and were as large as a peck measure. How big is a peck?
About a bushel.
About a bushel? Okay, so that's you guys can't see me gesturing, but large as a peck measure. The body was covered with big, heavy scales which moved as the monster walked. But the head of the dragon was the most fearful looking part of all. It was as large as that of a horse and covered with large, warty knots. Directly on the forehead and just below the eyes was a monstrous, jagged, horn-like protuberance, and just back of the ears were 2 similar-looking horns, although somewhat smaller. The eyes were as large as a teacup and stuck out from the socket at least 1.5 inches. The mouth of the beast could not be seen very well, for the struggling calf was in it, but it must have been exceedingly large, for the monstrous jaws reached almost across the calf's body.
So already I'm kind of going like, oh, this is shenanigans. This man's scared. But he had an awful long time to look at this thing in order to essentially cobble together about 14 different
Different.
beasts,
You're
both mundane and fantastical, of
fantastical.
which it's comparable to. I like it was about the size of a cow, except smaller and shorter. I had a face like
Yeah.
it's
Uh,
a little much.
yeah, the protuberances remind me of ever see those like horned chameleons who have
I
like the
have.
long nose? That's like what I'm picturing, but like a dragon version of that.
Well,
That
and he
also
went straight to dragon at the end. I'm so why didn't he just lead with that?
yeah. Now in his defense, they spell dragon Dragoon, which I guess maybe dragoon, which to me is like a British fighting force of some
That's what I
sort.
was. Yeah,
So
wasn't it a
so
ship?
maybe it was a ship. I thought it was like a type of soldier that was like the opposite of cavalry. But
Maybe.
anyway, I'm sure our historical buff friends will correct us on that. The monster had traveled at least 100 yards towards the river before I recovered sufficiently to move. I was not asleep, but as wide awake as I ever was in my life. I resolved to follow the monster at a safe distance and see where it went. Rushing into the house, I seized my double-barreled shotgun, and without waking the rest of the family, I started after the ugly beast and again caught sight of it just as it reached a clump of bushes on the cliff which overhangs the river near the Line Ferry. It was broad daylight by this time, and with both barrels of my gun, I cocked and followed in the monster's wake. When I reached the cliff, I looked down over it and saw the monster just crossing the road, making for the big rock in the water's edge alongside Seltzer's hole. It turned around when it reached the river's bank and was glaring back at me, and then, with something between a growl and a bellow, leaped into the water and disappeared from sight. I went down to the bank and watched for a sight of the monster for over an hour, but as it did not come up again to show itself, I went home. I did not tell my folks what I had seen, but simply said that somebody or something had stolen one of the calves during the night. Neither did I say anything about it to any of the neighbors until this morning. I knew they would not believe me and might start a report that I was going crazy. But this morning, Mr. Blank came over to my house and after fidgeting about for an hour or two, took me out to the barn and said, I just like the idea of these guys just like beating around the bush after they both see a monster for like 2 hours.
Right,
Like
and I
not
don't care how old this paper is. I want to know who's just throwing about. I don't bandy about the word protuberance
I
on the
know that's it.
regular.
Right. That's yeah. The writings. It's good. After fidgeting about for an hour or two, took me out to the barn to say that he was bound to tell me something. After swearing me to secrecy, he told me that the monster I had seen on Tuesday morning, for it was evidently the same one, had carried off one of his finest sheep this morning, and that he followed it to Seltzer's hole where it disappeared in the river. Mr. Blank and I then went up to Mr. Blank. So I assume this is the third Mr. Blank.
Right, it's no relation.
No relation, just
Okay,
there's
just
blanks
same
all over
last
the
name.
yeah, yeah. Um, and told him what we had seen, and he told us that he had seen it twice last week, but was afraid to tell anyone for fear that they would not believe him. I can't imagine what kind of an animal it can be or how it came to be in Seltzer's hole. We are going to keep a lookout for the monster tonight, and if he comes out, we will try and give him a good dose of buckshot. A number of people in the neighborhood have reported that they have seen a strange-looking beast at night in the hills near Cheat Haven during the past 3 months, but no one paid any attention to the stories, thinking them the creature of an imaginative brain. But if the word of the three farmers referred to can be believed, the reports are in fact true.
Yeah, how many different things can you compare to? Now, again, the protuberance thing,
Yeah.
I'm sure the farmers were, I don't doubt that someone was interviewed. I'm sure the farmers' words were filtered.
Mm-hmm.
through the writer, I don't know what to make. Okay, could it be a cat come out of the water like a wet cat?
Yeah.
Definitely, like, could it be people working on the road were taking him and then there's this one occurrence and everything gets conflated?
Mm-hmm.
All these things sound probable. Do I think there was something that was as big as a cow except a little shorter and a little more narrow with the face of a dragon and a barbed tail?
I like the
No.
barbed tail. Like the fish tail is a little bit interesting. Like because it almost sounds like a dragon until you get to that like fish like the forked tail. That's kind of that's
Yeah, but
unique.
it's saying when you say it almost sounds like a dragon. Well, we don't have any real dragons sitting out there, so anything like for all I know, dragons have forked tails if they're a real thing,
Right, right. No,
which there
when I
doesn't
say
seem to be.
dragon, yeah, when I say dragon, I think like oh, like an apex predator that's an amalgamation of other, like with the scales and everything.
Right, I'm picking you
Yeah,
up now.
right. More
Okay.
of a yeah. No, but point taken. But but I do like again. I'm stuck on the three protuberances and the eyes that stick out. That sounds like a giant chameleon.
Yeah,
You know,
that
like
is a good point.
that's
So
just kind
here's
of
what I throw out: like, what
it's a
could it
different
be?
one.
Something like a could be someone with an exotic pet or exotic animal, like a menagerie out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's not completely outside the probability or the realm of probability.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we both remember the whole thing out in Ohio with all the
Right.
poisonous snakes and everything
Right.
being let out as a guy commits suicide. It's could it be like a Gila monster? Not a Gila monster. What
Yeah.
are the Komodo dragon?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, like oh,
If I didn't know I was looking, I'd be like, that's like the size of a cow except smaller.
yeah. But yes, I mean, like that's. I think if there is a mundane explanation for this, like it has to be something like that. It has to be like a Komodo dragon or some other kind of predator that we just don't have around here.
Right.
Because like a lot of the stuff outside of the tail can be accounted for in just like kind of confusion, you know?
Right.
Like think about something, I'm not saying this is what it is, but think about the idea of seeing a hyena out of context.
Well, yeah, and it's not just that it has to be something that isn't around here. It has to be
Right.
something that wouldn't be well known enough. Like
Right.
if it were a giraffe,
Right.
which I don't think it is, but
No,
let's just
again.
say it's a giraffe. I would think that giraffe is a common enough reference that a
Right.
farmer in rural western Pennsylvania
Mhm.
will go, yeah, it looked a lot like a giraffe, a bloodthirsty giraffe
Right.
running off with my finest sheep.
Yeah, with find a sheep. Yeah, so yeah, I think if it's a mundane explanation, it has to be something like that, which is almost like just like that's a pretty fantastical story, even if that's what it is. Because like
Agreed.
obviously like stuff is like incorrect, but you know like the scales could be just like matted hair or wet hair kind of thing
Yeah.
in a way that's not familiar, you know, kind of thing.
I think of when we talked about the Peninsula Python, we mentioned like,
Mhm.
okay, I think we were able to find too that it was a real occurrence,
Yes.
but it just definitely did not last as long as
It was not,
this.
yeah, how it was reported. Yeah, exactly.
Right, and it was unusual because we're talking about something, if not an anaconda, something
Mhm.
a greatly
Some-
sized snake.
right,
We
right.
definitely don't have here.
Yeah, something that was, yeah. Like the one thing that mentions is the webbed bear-like feet, and it's like that could just be hair. Like
Right.
you look at like the feet of like even like a dog that is like a water dog, and it's like there's a lot of hair on those things.
Yes, there is.
You know, and so you can see someone, you know, being like, oh, those are webbed.
Well,
you
let me
know?
throw this out there
Yeah.
too. He's talking like he's scared, but again, he's getting a lot of detail, even if it's not all adding up to any
Right.
one thing, really.
Right.
So he's getting all that detail, but in the same breath, he's saying the thing made it like 200 yards before he got
Right.
himself together. So here's what I have to believe now. I'm assuming that means that this thing is booking it.
Yeah.
Right?
It's yeah.
Did
you'd
you
think,
get that
yeah.
impression?
I get the impression it was yeah. It's trucking. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But then he runs back to the house quietly
Yeah.
enough to not disturb anybody.
I don't know if I'd be quiet about it. Yeah.
I would, yeah, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
other people's sleep wouldn't be the most pressing concern I have because I'm wondering
Right.
if this thing is taking down
A
real
calf.
fine sheep.
Right. Yeah.
Like
Or
it
fine
probably
sheep.
do some
Yeah.
damage to me. I would want somebody in the family to know, like, hey, if I don't make it back, just assume that I was taken down by a thing the size of a large common bovine, but a bit smaller than that. And okay, he goes back into the house quietly, gets the gun. I like how they specify it's a double barrel.
Mm-hmm.
Starts blasting. No, he goes out,
Yeah, I start blasting. See.
and he catches up with the thing. See, I don't buy all that.
Yeah, like
It's
yeah,
just
the
this is
logistics
what
of
I'm getting
that.
at.
Yeah, the logistics of that encounter are a little. Yeah.
I would wager that yes, as you've already brought up, a mundane explanation, not a mundane, but a completely plausible,
Mm-hmm.
reality-based explanation. Something from somebody's menagerie has escaped.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We're in agreement. I would say the most mundane explanation is this was just a fun story
Right.
that is a whole cloth creation.
It's a great story.
Either the farmers are having a fun time,
Right.
or the journalist is, and there's no farmers involved.
Right.
And that's why an increasing reason for anonymity on top of that.
Right.
And so now we have this story out there, and now it's only going to grow.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the most mundane explanation.
No, I think you're. I think you're probably right there. But whenever this was mentioned, it was like Cheat River Monster, and I was like, "The heck is a Cheat River Monster?" Because what I thought they were talking about is another dubious cryptid of Western Pennsylvania waterways, which is sometimes referred to as the Monongahela monster. Other times is referred to as the Ogua, Ogua. Are you familiar with this one by chance?
Now, and you had asked me this too, and I
Yeah.
remember I had played at the
Yes.
31st Street Pub in Pittsburgh many years ago. Played with a band called Monongahela Monster. Pretty good band in my memory. And that was where I was introduced to this. But no, I'll let you go on from there. If it wasn't for some band, I would not be aware of it.
Right. Yeah. I had heard this referenced a few times when, which we should do a deep dive into at some point on its own, but deep dive into freshwater, well, I guess alligators in the Three Rivers that people have like released.
Right.
Like,
There's over the past few years during the whole
yeah.
COVID thing, there were at least two. I believe one was captured in the Kiski area.
Yeah, Kiski River. Yeah.
If you're not from the greater Pittsburgh area, that means nothing to you.
Nothing.
I
Yeah.
think we have a few alligators.
Yeah, but I do like the idea of out of place animals, even if they are domesticated, releases. But I heard both the Monongahela monster and the Ogua referenced in like news articles years ago when people were talking about seeing these alligator sightings. Because again, when the alligator sightings first like started, like people were like, "Oh, look at these yinzers like saying they see an alligator in the Mon," and then it turns out a few days later, the animal control is like, "Guess what we found?"
Yeah, you're right. I remember that
Yeah.
because there was a lot of incredulity about it, and understandably so.
Right. Yeah. So when I realized they weren't talking about when referencing this Cheat River monster, that I realized I'm like, oh, they're not talking about this Monongahela monster. I'm like, I wonder what that is. Did some digging, and so again, this Monongahela monster is a cryptid that kind of like a lot of times has a few different origin stories and a few different it probably acts as a proxy for a few different things. It seems to capture everything that's not just like the giant catfish lore in the area.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so this one, it's pretty cool. What it is supposed to be is it's supposed to be a 20-foot long, 500-pound animal that looks like a giant prehistoric turtle with like an alligator mouth to it. So it has this rough, scaly skin, dark green, and it has an extraordinarily long tail, kind of like an alligator, where it has like the big V in it and everything. And I think this is why I was thinking about the the Cheat River monster when they mentioned the forked tail and everything. I'm like, oh, is that
Yeah.
the Monongahela monster? No, because this one is basically, think of like a giant snapping turtle with longer legs, and give it a like a T-Rex's mouth, basically, which is like pretty. It's pretty out there, and it's supposed to be a big creature that again takes down big prey.
Would you say it
So
was the size of a cow but slightly shorter?
I would say it's the size of a cow, but a little bit longer, but it's basically a cow. Just think of a cow. Whatever you're thinking of right now, that's exactly what it
Right.
is.
Imagine a cow
You got it.
with maybe
You're
like a
there.
dragon's head.
Yeah.
And not
But
wing things, but protuberances.
so there's a few different like accounts again that like get muddled into the same tales here. But two of the older ones that you see cited a lot when you look up these monsters. And again, the Ogwa name looks like it may be a Delaware name, but again, a lot of these stories kind of attribute a lot of these things to native tribe legends, but none of the articles I found seem to be written by people from those tribes. Who knows about the provenance of some of those connections? But in these stories, the other cool thing that I liked, and this kind of goes back to that dragon thing we were talking about earlier, it's said to have a lair, kind of like how turtles will like burrow out in like creek banks and everything.
Yeah.
Um, except it is said to hoard treasure from its victims.
Why?
You know what? I think it's just a materialistic animal. It's kind of
And
like a crow. It just
and,
like
and
shiny
saying
things.
treasure, like what is it? Is it pilfering their wallets?
Just mugging them. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
right.
yeah. And which but that came up in a few different things. It's like, oh, it's den. Like, a snapping turtle's dragon den. It's like, I don't know if snapping turtles hoard things. So one of the stories apparently comes from 1745, so like
Really?
way back there, yeah.
Okay.
And this is down near the town of Hout, Hault, West Virginia, West by God, Virginia. And you have apparently a 12-year-old boy who's fishing along the riverbank when an enormous turtle type creature suddenly erupts from the water, grabs the kid. The horrified relatives watch this happen as the thing drags the kid beneath the surface, never to be seen again. And apparently, this story spread all over the place, and it gained some traction to the point where there was a soldier who was stationed in a nearby fort that has a letter that got published where he described a river devil, as he calls it, that would lie in wait for deer and other farm animals, grab it in its jaws, and then pull them downstream to a lair where they would apparently send hunting parties after this thing. One of them apparently managed to kill the beast, which measured like 15 feet, 20 feet long, 400 or 500 pounds. And this thing had two heads, two crocodile hydra type
Well,
heads.
now how come that two-headed aspect wasn't mentioned until they killed it?
Previously, yeah, like you'd think you lead with two heads.
Right. That would have, I mean, we talked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
You would think you would pick up on the otter aspect. I mean, because otherwise it really does just sound like a
Mm-hmm.
very old, large snapping
Right.
turtle. Which again, I'm not gonna say that's not terrifying. Those suckers can be really mean,
Really mean, really big.
really
Yeah.
big, and they can definitely be really dangerous. They can also live a really long time. So I could imagine
Mm-hmm.
it's probable that an abnormally large alligator snapper, could take a child down.
Right.
Don't know how
Yeah.
big this kid is.
Right. Yeah. Maybe he was, yeah, small
So
frame.
the two-headed aspect,
Is new. Yeah. So like,
right?
so again, a lot of this kind of sounds like things just kind of being cobbled together after over time, but a lot of this stuff persisted, and I think a lot of just the stuff that becomes on the fringes or has a paranormal lean to it will just get kind of attributed to this Monongahela monster. So these sightings continue, here and there they kind of pop up and everything. There was some in the 1980s that I think you're going to be interested in because of a connection. In 1983, there was a rash of these sightings in Rivesville, West Virginia, Rivesville, along Paw Paw Creek.
I'm into it.
So, so along Paw Paw Creek, there's this counter with this coal miner, and we actually have the gentleman's name, John Edward Wright. Now, granted, that's a very common name, but it's a name nonetheless. So he apparently was fishing along Paw Paw Creek, saw a huge serpentine creature while fishing on the river at night, and he watched in disbelief as the beast's massive head and long writhing tail broke the surface mere yards from where he sat. White's story made local papers, and soon other eyewitnesses were coming forward with their own tales of close calls with the Ogwa. And that is kind of the impetus of like the modern sightings of this thing. You have cryptozoology websites, YouTube channels. A lot of people cover the series of sightings around this monster. Now, a lot of them really do seem like, again, they kind of capture everything where it's like, is this just a big fish? Is this a snake? Is this the big snapping turtle thing? Because a lot of them too talk about these skids that it'll leave that sound a lot like alligator slides that like you see, even in the South.
Right, from the tail of one
from the tail and everything.
And they're pretty weighty things too.
Right. So this thing sounds like it's amphibious, and there are apparent photos which just look like blurry things in the water. Like they're not great. Imagine a photo of an Ogwa from 1983, and like whatever you're thinking of, that's what the photo looks like.
Just picture a cow.
Yes, picture a cow, but it's not a cow. It's it's basically a cow. And so whenever I came across these unimpressive photos that come from a very cool story from Paw Paw Creek, that made me start thinking of like, okay, is this just a bit of fun hype, And when I think of fun hype around freshwater monsters in Western Pennsylvania, I think of one of our favorites, Raystown Ray.
I am going to be so frustrated with this story, and I'll say why in a minute. But I do want to say that if somebody killed this Monongahela monster, I would have hoped for better documentation. But I'm assuming there wasn't because of this is practically ancient history.
Well, but at the time, you're talking the 1700s.
That's what I'm saying.
But in southwestern PA, and there was enough infrastructure out here, and there was enough like people that were serious about the area that if someone had a 20-foot wide turtle shell from a two-headed monster that they had killed, like that's not getting lost. That's going up somewhere.
Right.
That's going up somewhere. Like
the place is small enough too that you would figure they would have marched it over to Philadelphia.
Right, exactly. So like, forgive me for being incredulous, but I don't think that monster existed or got killed.
I think maybe what happened was a giant two-headed alligator snapping turtle was killed. And giant within the realm of totally, realistic things. Now, the Raystown Lake one is going to bother me terribly. And I know this already. And the reason I'm going to say it's going to bother me is because Raystown Lake is a man-made lake.
It's a relatively new man-made lake too.
At that, it is I think it's the largest or the second. It is the largest man-made lake in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I've been there. It's lovely.
Right. Oh, it's beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't buy I'm always being skeptical of the lake monster thing to begin with, even the classical cases like Loch Ness and whatnot. Now, I am extra dubious about monsters dwelling within a man-made lake. But go on.
I think the Raystown stuff is the reason that people have that reaction to it like you're mentioning, is because all of the is it a relict plesiosaur?
I'm gonna go with
Is it a
no.
whale is it an inland whale population that got trapped? Like you see a lot of like you talk about a lot of other places. Like all of those natural
Yeah, driving for a natural
yeah, they
explanation.
just go out the window. So
Right.
we're only left with the supernatural explanations,
That's a good point.
which for a lot of these they don't. But that's the thing is when you read these sightings, they don't sound like supernatural sightings, like what we've been talking about the last 2 weeks with the forest poltergeist stuff. Like those are very supernatural sounding encounters. There's a lot of
Agreed.
yeah, there's a lot of metaphysical elements to it. For a lot of these, it sounds like people are talking about what you would call natural occurrences. So, and I just think a lot of these, and I came across when I started digging, I came across quite a few new sightings, not new sightings, sightings that were accounts that were new to me. And because I first started looking at, again, like the photos and like, boy, if you want to see some unconvincing photos of a cryptid, look up the Raystown Ray photos.
You had me at unconvincing
I know
photo.
they're so bad. Like they're so just like, and again, as a photographer, I am the first to say that like a photo sometimes does not do an experience justice.
You
Um,
have no idea how scared I was on that bank.
yeah, it's just
This log was floating right at me.
it was a menacing log. So let me go ahead and just rattle a few of these off, and
Yeah, do not let me keep interrupting you. Go
yeah,
right ahead.
and again, these are from our local area, and we're gonna joke about how these some of these people just I'm just gonna get into it. I'm not even gonna preface it, just get into it. So this is from August 2008 from someone named Penny. One warm, still evening during late August of 2008, we decided to drift the boat out offshore to do some night fishing right at the bend of where we camp at the Sonoy sites. This is just around the corner from Seven Points. Well, we were using our new fish drawing light. This is a neon green light, longer than a fluorescent light, waterproof of course, and guaranteed to draw fish when dropped overboard with a rope and a weight to pull it down to about 30 or so feet. Anyway, we were using the light, fishing in the stillest water like black glass. So calm. No breezes, just quiet. Well,
Sounds like an awesome night
I know this
surfing.
sounds great.
Yeah, sounds like a good
Yeah,
time.
Penny knows how to chill out, which is I appreciate that for her. Well, along about 11:12 p.m., we were deciding to head back. We were just sitting there on the stern, talking and enjoying the calmness of the warm night. All of a sudden, from out of the middle of the lake, there was this whooshing sound. I thought it might be a boat, but there were no lights, no motor sound, just the sound of water whooshing straight towards us. He grabbed the spotlight, and about 100 feet from our boat, there was something. It looked like an upside down canoe rushing through the water at us. He said, "Grab the fish light now, get it up." I had actually forgotten about it, Penny says. I grabbed for the rope and started to pull like crazy. He kept the spotlight on the thing as I grabbed hand over hand, trying to get the underwater light up and in the boat. As soon as I got the light up, I turned it off and stood there with him watching this thing get closer. It came within 30 feet of the boat when it went completely under. Where it went, I have no idea. But it left a wake that shook the boat. We rocked enough almost to push up to shore. I tell you what, we headed back to camp. We sat in the RV drinking tea and, and tried to make sense of it. There are no fish that act like that are native to the lake. Not even eels break the water surface like that, and definitely none that big. We know what fish in the lake can get huge, but they lay in the bottom and they don't hunt on the surface. After seeing this site, we wonder if this may have been the Raystown Ray. This may have been a Raystown Ray sighting. We have heard the swishing of the water late at night from our campsite on shore and various times throughout the year, and you can only see the water breaking under the light of a bright moon. It makes me think that the cove by the Sonoy campsites may be the play area for whatever this monster is.
Okay, I mean, again, it sounds like a nice night, calm,
Sounds like a
warm
great night.
night, black glass water, like great descriptions. I really
Yeah.
appreciate. going and having getting spooked out and having tea in an RV.
Yeah, it
Like,
was. Yeah,
yeah,
like that's she paints a picture. She really does.
she
Um,
should. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree. Penny lays it on, and
yeah.
so get me wise. What exactly is so crazy about? So something's coming towards the boat.
It sounds like so if it's something like she says something on the surface rushing towards the boat, her and her husband seem to think that it's something attracted by this large fish light that they're using.
Which is why you use a fish
Yeah, which
light,
is yeah,
sure.
exactly. Yeah. She said the size of a tipped upside down canoe. So that's big. It's not insane, but it's
Right.
big.
Because I know I've talked about, fishing on St. Lawrence
Yeah.
as a kid up in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and almost being pulled over by like something like a pike or something. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can get some big fish, they could do some. So it's okay, maybe you don't think these are the most aggressive fish out there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but still,
Right.
I'd be spooked. I'd be shaken up. I wouldn't be attributing rather this to
Right.
anything supernatural
Right.
or even just crypto natural.
Right. And like again, it is like she does mention that it seemed to be something that was hunting on the surface, and that's not something that like catfish do, or lake trout or anything like that. I don't even know if they
Well,
have lake trout
lake
in there.
trout would, wouldn't they? I
Did
mean,
they have lake trout
I don't know, but
well,
I
lake
they
trout
would
and
come to the surface.
like bull trout can get big.
They sure can.
I mean that's hold on. We're doing some live research right now.
While you're doing that, I mean, let me just say this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lake, so I would imagine that typically
Yeah.
food is stable, but fish, by and large, are pretty
Yeah.
opportunistic feeders, and
That's true. They're
if they're
predators.
hungry
Yeah.
enough, right, they are predatory
Yeah.
animals. I mean, I don't think they're trying to take the boat down thinking they're going to be eating like kings if they pull this off, but
Right. The North American record for a lake trout is 73 pounds. Just
that's
shy of
pretty big.
just shy of 50 inches. Now that's not a canoe, but that's a big fish that's all muscle and would
And
feed on the surface.
again, it
If
could
being
knock a
opportunistic.
canoe about for sure. And
Right.
think about this too.
Yeah.
If you're seeing, we've talked something like this before. If you're seeing something that you do not expect to see, or it's just of
Right.
proportions that you are like, that is not normal, it's kind of grow
Yeah.
a bit in your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has to. So, but I just think that's a that was like a fun sighting.
oh
Um,
yeah,
and
these people sound like they have fun in general.
right, right. So let's go ahead and get through. Let's do a few more of these. So this one is from John R. Pendle of Pittsburgh, and this is in 1994, which is a great year. So, and this was on this is on a cruise near these campground areas, which
I'm
seem to be
assuming this is like a pontoon tour sort of
right.
cruise.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the impression I get from the heading here. Sighting was approximately 9 a.m. in the morning. A friend of mine invited me and his wife, as well as his in-laws, for a quick morning ride on the calm lake on his pontoon. There we go. It was a nice warm morning, cruising around 20 knots. Me and my wife were on the stern of the boat. His wife and her parents were on the bow. While my friend was navigating the boat, he turned around and we were having idle chat, drinking coffee. In about 20 to 25 minutes into our ride, three of us glanced off the port side of the boat, and all at the same time, we have seen ripples in the water. A long, dark, somewhat shiny black object that surfaced onto the top of the water. Then it seemed to spin and turn over and then submersed and disappeared. So if you're paying attention, that was one sentence.
Right.
Um,
And also don't go on a pontoon boat and start using terms like port side.
Yeah, like you're not
Come
a
on now.
like come on Ahab. Like you need to but yeah, so seemed to spin and turn over and then submerged and disappeared. He immediately
So it's
shut.
it's roiling about. Like I've
Right,
seen
yeah,
like catfish
yeah,
do that.
right, or even carp. They like,
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you. Carp was actually what I meant
yeah,
to say.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He immediately shut down the boat in amazement. The three of us asked each other, "Did you see that?" His wife and her parents were asking what was the matter, and we were speechless. The size of the object was at least 10 to 12 feet long. Putting into perspective, we were riding on a 19-foot open bow pontoon boat. The object was approximately 40 to 50 feet away. Nevertheless, we finished our cruise and reported our findings to the rest of the group we were camping with, and obviously no one believed us. To this day, we still talk about what we saw, and we still get harassed about the fish story. A friend of mine sent me this link today, thus the reason for reporting our sighting just now. Now we have proof to our doubting Thomas friends and others of what we have seen today. So that's from
Ah,
John
okay.
John Pendle. So
Well, again, people are having a good time. I'm going to say this: catfish. Yeah, I've seen them do
catfish.
that, and
Yeah.
also, it's a fish that can get pretty big. I don't know what all fish they have
Right.
stocked in Raystown Lake because no fish occurred naturally there. But again, with it being on the surface, it can create a
The
wake. It can
surface
give the
stuff.
illusion, and
Yeah.
even think about, you know how like if you're spear fishing for fish,
Mm.
the way the water makes the where the fish is at shift. You're supposed to throw in front of where you see the
Right.
fish.
Right. That's a good
So
point. That
there's like different optical
disruption.
things that can exactly it can
Right.
affect the your interpretation of the size is what I'm saying. I don't doubt that these people saw something weird. If you're not accustomed to seeing fish do something like this, it's gonna really throw you off. It's
Right.
very weird. I totally get it. I always talk about I grew up with a pond in the backyard. There were
Mm-hmm.
catfish. I walked around every morning, caught frogs, played hockey there in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
My life, it was the focal point of my life in many ways.
Right. Right.
I will never forget the morning. You've heard it too. I'm walking along. There
Mm-hmm.
was one like grassy area on one side of the pond, and I see like a log laying half in the water. And so I go walk up, and I get scared to death when the log just shoot into the water. It was a catfish just kind of laying on half on the land, half in the water.
Right.
The weirdest thing, and it
Yeah.
stuck with me. And then I learned later, like, oh, they'll do things like that. The weird
Right.
gets, but and even now I know, like, oh, that's not out of the norm
Right.
behaviorally, but it's still very weird, and it still stuck with me.
Right.
And I was really shaken up because I was going to pull this log out of the water,
That
and
would
it
have
jumps
been
out at me. Yeah,
his log was real upset about something.
it kind of
Yeah.
was cow-like in it. No, sorry, I can't let that
It
go.
was like a cow, but without the
In
legs.
no way at all. It
Yeah.
was like a cow, but had things that were kind of like not wings. They were kind of like wings, but they
They
weren't.
weren't
And a
wings.
barbed tail.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
and a dragon head. So basically, you're run of the mill cow. Did I
it's
mention
basically a
the fine
cow.
sheep it had in its mouth? Can't really describe its mouth very well because it was the fine sheep looking
Because
in
of
there.
this calf.
It's basically a
So
cow.
okay, let me go through
Please.
one more sighting, and then a few other things I want to say about Raystown Ray, obviously. But so this one, um, gentleman named Bill, August 29th, 2009. I was fishing from a boat with my son on the Raystown Lake. It was around 6:45 p.m. and we were making our way back to the landing. We were near the Snyderstown portion of the lake where there is a point of land. As we were heading south, I looked towards the west shore after my son started to point at something. I have really no idea what this thing was, but it looked like a large, thick black snake with a huge head that bobbed in and out of the water. I moved a little bit closer, but my son was getting scared. So I cut the motor and looked through my binoculars. The body was moving in coils or humps up and down in the water. The creature had no fins like a fish, and its head was diamond shaped. The weirdest feature was that of the eyes, which were dark, small, and somewhat slanted. Were not seen on the side of the head, but placed forward on the head. I got an excellent look through my binoculars. I'd say I was about 50 yards from us. When it raised up, the head moved side to side. It made no sounds. I'd say it was at least 20 feet long. I lived in Altoona, PA for only a few years, and this was the second time I'd fished that lake. I'm from Wisconsin, and I have fished many large lakes and rivers, but I've never seen anything like this to this day.
Okay, that's interesting.
That was different. See,
That is
that's
different.
a very different. I mean, the diamond-shaped head sounds like a predatory venomous snake. You know,
Uh-huh. And of course, we do have
we
aquatic
do.
snakes from the.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's different. Now, 20 feet long. I think again, and maybe this is because I'm not the greatest at
Right.
describing the length of things, but I
Yeah.
also imagine that having binoculars affects your ability to distinguish how big a thing
But
is.
yeah, well, it has to take away some of your reference, especially when you're looking at water. Like
Right.
you don't have anything like to compare it
Unless
to.
there's a yardstick floating by,
Right. Which boy would that
which
be
would be been
convenient.
real handy.
That'd
But
be yeah.
yeah,
Which like you do hear sometimes. There are accounts that people say of not so much Raystown Ray,
I thought
but
you were
like
gonna say if yardsticks
of
floating
the
in
R6 floating.
waters.
No, but you do have times where like it's like I think in one of the the Erie Lake Monster or like big what's this Lake Erie one where someone had a large fish that I think was probably a sturgeon that
Yes,
was near their kayak and they're like this is a 12-foot kayak and it was a few feet longer, you know.
yes.
And it's like okay, that sounds like
Well,
one
we
you had
kind
a
of had
reference
that with the cat, what I'm calling the
the
catfish story.
catfish.
You do
Yeah.
kind of have that there in their
Yeah,
defense.
sometimes. Yeah, so it's like okay, like that person's like size estimate is probably at least marginally more accurate. So yeah, so Raystown Ray has had a lot of attention over the years, which I think again is just kind of fun. There was a fact or faked episode in 2008 that it was probably later. That was probably 2010, 2011 episode that dealt with Raystown Ray. And again, the people they interviewed on it, I remembered being just like quintessential South Central Pennsylvania folks. And it was just like a fun, it just again, it was just like kind of fun. I did find a quote from someone from who's apparently one of the staffers for the US Corps of Engineers that manages Raystown. Um now and I think this was a little I'll just read the quote first. I believe it must be a vegetarian. We have not seen any evidence of this animal taking fish, geese, otters, or ducks. So I would suggest that our swimmers and boaters are very safe. It appears this animal's habits are similar to manatees, which are completely herbivorous and gentle. The increase of weed beds around the lake is probably providing more food in the shallows for herbivores, and that would increase our sightings. And that was from back around the same time.
I
I
think
think
that's a
people
very nice way of saying this is not a real thing, people. Let's calm
right, like
down.
yeah, like please don't let this make you stay out of the lake, you know, kind of thing. And I think something that was a very coy way of
When we
responding.
created this lake,
Yeah,
this man-made lake, we did not stock any monsters
yeah,
within.
dude. I bet there are people out there that are like, "Oh, PA Fish and Boat Commission, they're stocking monsters, you know, just like they're stocking
Well,
coyotes,
I was gonna say like
taking,
the dogman
yeah,
people
like
might
just
go that route.
the dog, yeah, right,
The
right.
people like
So
the government is creating these hybrid
yeah,
half dog, half man.
they're just letting them loose and seeing what happens. Yeah,
Right. That
yeah,
seems
that's how science works. Um,
that's how
but
I do it.
yeah, but again, Raystown Ray. I know Raystown Ray grinds your gears for obvious reasons.
Yes, thank you.
I have different cryptid or you know paranormal things that grind my gears. I know my brother does. Other people do. Um, but I think generally speaking, Raystown Ray is another fun one. And anytime I can go through a few degrees of separation and get back to Raystown Ray, I'm
Yeah,
happy to do
I'm
it.
not gonna say I didn't enjoy it.
Right?
So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's that.
Yeah.
And again, the last story you read, that was interesting. I liked it because again, the person wasn't really suggesting that there was necessarily anything fantastical other
Right.
than like
Yeah.
I have no idea what I saw, but it was
Mm-hmm.
very large and I was scared
Right.
or shaken and whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is again,
Totally reasonable.
Right. Yeah. None of these people are saying things that I disagree with. Like, it's like, no, I would have reacted the same way. But man, like, I think my big takeaway from all of my research in this episode is I feel like the campgrounds in the evening in the summer at Raystown Lake are probably fun places to hang out.
Stayed in a cabin there once.
Oh, really? See,
Got there.
I've never
Problem
been there.
was, got there real late, so didn't really get to appreciate anything. And in the morning, got to see the lake, got to look at it, but then we had to move on.
Oh,
We were on our way to Orbisonia, which is another nice time.
right. Okay, yeah, yeah. But yeah, so that's
Or not Orbisonia. I'm sorry. There's a narrow gauge rail track. Orbisonia is where you and I went fishing once, only to find that there was no water left because of strip mining.
Trophy trout waters.
Yeah. We were like, well, it's named Orbisonia. It has to be
right. It has to
quality.
Be great. Yeah, we were going off of old information.
Yeah. Wow.
But anyway, so if you have a story about a freshwater monster that we should be savvy to, we would love to hear it. So you can reach out to us on either Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, or you can simply send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.